Married to Rosemary, who was born and raised in this church by one of our former senior ministers. He worked for Lexmark and spent some time running a plant in the Philippines, which I'm anxious to hear about. Jeff is an elder, currently, correct?
Not currently.
Or has been.
Yeah.
He's
He's a
on the
has-been
part-
elder, is that what you're saying? He's a has-been elder?
Has been.
Well, once an elder, always.
Okay.
He's growing into it, right?
But he is often a part of our mission trip crews and our Habitat for Humanity crews. And with no further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Jeff Minnick.
That'll be the only applause I get today. So I've had 2 requests for the Philippines, to talk about the Philippines, so I guess I'm gonna have to bring that in serious at some point. I'm trying to stay away from it. But, a little more background about myself.
Stay close to the mic.
Yeah, a little more background. How about that? Can you hear?
Talk it loud, yeah.
I'm just talking.
Good.
Speak loud, all right. Let me put my glasses on.
Put your glasses on.
All right. So a little bit more background about myself. My father worked for IBM and moved here in the early 60s, so I'm one of these people that showed up when IBM plant was growing out here. I grew up on the north side. If you know anything about Lexington, there was sort of 2 things. The IBMers either moved to the south side or they were on the north side. My dad wanted to be close to work, so we were on the north side. My mother didn't work outside the home, and I went to, people would say this, but I went to Bryan Station. They go, ooh, but anyway. I did too, so we're okay. I could, there's more people than you would be aware of. I graduated from UK with a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. Then I went to graduate school at Georgia Tech, and then I came back to Lexington and went to work for IBM, because at that time it was a good place to work, right? It was they weren't laying people off, and the money was good. I worked for IBM until IBM sold Lexmark. That was our first thing where it was a shock. What do you mean getting sold? And I transferred to Lexmark. So I worked a combined 36 years between IBM and Lexmark. Finished up with Lexmark in the Philippines. I took an assignment there to run the R&D facility. We were there for 4 years. I could talk a long time about that. Rosemary led a very, let's just say, I'll say posh. We could say a lot of things. We had, we had a housekeeper, we had a gardener, we had drivers, we had 24-hour security. She had a private dance instructor that would come to the house. I had a personal trainer that came to the house. I'm trying to think of all, so tough life for her. I'm going to work every day, and she's working, but she's not leaving the house. And she figured out very early on with the traffic conditions there that she could get people to come to the house, and it was just as cheap, and you didn't have to get in the car. So that's just a little bit. If you got any questions, you can just chime in. I was told I had, was it 10 minutes, Paul?
At least 10.
Okay, all right. Okay. So who is the man that had the most influence on my life? That's the question number 1, right? When I was thinking about this, I was wondering why I just said man. I'm surprised it didn't say person, but I'll stick to the script. First, let me just say, I have a confession to make. And that is that I had a drug problem when I was growing up. And that's because I was drugged to church every time the doors were open.
Oh.
My mother made sure that we went to church on Sundays for sure. She was a very religious person. My dad made sure that we were in church anytime anything was going on. He was very involved in the church from day one. So for me, growing up, I never had any exposure to anything except for going to church, going to Sunday school, going to church on Sunday night, going to church on Wednesday night. Can anybody guess what denomination I grew up in? Baptist church. Got it. One of the things I would say about him was that he was very involved in the church. He was a deacon. He taught Sunday school, and what I would say is I couldn't get away from him because he taught Sunday school, and it was like he was following me all the way through till my young adult life. I finally was able to get in somebody else's Sunday school class. I think when I was like 17 or something like that. So he had a lot of influence in demonstrating what faith in God was, and hard work and persistence. But what I would say is he was human, so you didn't really want to be around him if you got him upset. And so every now and then my sister will remind me, she says, my dad's with my CW, she said, you're acting a little bit like CW. So anyway, so that sort of level sets me that I need to act a little bit different. He grew up, both my parents grew up in West Virginia, in coal mine country. And when my dad graduated from high school, he turned down a scholarship to go to University of Cincinnati. He thought he was going to go to work in the coal mines. And my grandfather took him into the coal mines. He was in there for about 2 hours. He came out, he says, I'm never going back there again. So he got out of West Virginia because he went into the Air Force, which is sort of how, you end up places because of things like that. Went to the Air Force, was in the Air Force for 8 years. I think he said he was making $125 a month while he was in the Air Force. Left the Air Force to go to work for IBM, where he was making $125 a week. So that was, early 60s. That's big money, I think. With IBM, that's how we ended up here. He actually went to work for IBM in New York. My mother hated it in New York, and when he got the chance, he transferred to Lexington from Poughkeepsie. One of the things I can say about my dad is he liked to share the gospel, and so I heard David Shirey one time say that if you ever wanted to learn any stories from the Bible, just talk to somebody that grew up as a Baptist, because when you're in Sunday school, that's what you're learning. So he would do that. After church, he would go on visitations, door knocking people that had registered in church. He was always out there. And then later in life, I would just say, growing up, in West Virginia, ministers were not full-time jobs. That was their part-time job. They had a day job, and then they had their other job. Well, that's where my dad really ended up. So he was still working, but on Sunday afternoons, he would go around to nursing homes and preach. And the way I joked about it is he had a captive audience. They couldn't, I don't know how good he was, but they couldn't get away from it. Because a lot of them, somebody would wheel them in a wheelchair, and they didn't get wheeled out until he was done. So I know he used to go to the nursing home out there on Cleveland Road. Is that
Rose Manor? Rose Manor. I live right next door to it.
Yeah, he used to go out there. He used to go to Thompson Hood Veterans Center down in Wilmore, which is ironic because actually he spent the last 10 years of his life at Thompson Hood. So, but anyway.
Where'd you grow up in West Virginia?
I didn't grow up in West Virginia. My parents did. So it was was coal country, but it was outside of Beckley.
Okay.
You know, so it's not a big town, right?
No, there aren't.
If you know where Beckley is, and then outside of Beckley, there's another town called Sophie, and then there's a town called Coal City. That's where my mother grew up, and then my dad was in Midway, I guess is what you would say. But they lived in company housing, but then that the coal mines owned and things like that. Particularly difficult times. Well, actually, I would say there were two very difficult times for me. First was this sort of period between 1977 and 2000. My marriage was falling apart. Ultimately, I ended up getting a divorce. My mother had been struggling with cancer for 6 years, on again, off again. You know, they say that it was in remission and it would come back. But she'd finally been diagnosed terminal, and she had 8 to 12 weeks to live. I was in the middle of the divorce, and so I moved in with my parents to help take care of my parents, and I realized my dad was not all there. And turns out that they thought it was Alzheimer's. It was not Alzheimer's. It was another form of dementia. But it's like, wow, this is like the triple whammy. And that's when you sort of you gotta find some way to get through that, and we fall back on our faith. And so I would say that was the thing that my sisters, one of the things I remember my sisters telling me at the time is that God does not want you, that God wants you to be happy. And so you gotta go find those things that make you happy. And so anytime that you get down, depressed, or something like that, you had to figure out some way to get yourself out of that. And so that was a very difficult time for me, and that's when I leaned on my faith a lot to get through that. Shortly after that, just Tim alluded, I'm not going to make this about Rosemary, but shortly after that time actually is when I met Rosemary. As Tim said, her father was a senior minister. I never met him because he died like 2 years before I met her. He was the senior minister here for 25 years. So I was sort of I grew up in the Baptist church. I went to the Independent Christian church. I went to the Methodist church. I went to a lot of different churches, so I could say I was very ecumenical, one way to look at it. But she wasn't going to go anywhere else but Central, and so I'm coming to Central. I wasn't necessarily hung up with one or not, and so that's how I actually ended up at Central. As we were dating at the time, and I just started coming with her. I would say the second time, and I'm not going to go dig into it a lot, but 2020 was a very bad year. First off, my older sister died in February 2020. It was not COVID. She struggled with bipolar, and if anybody's heard this, a lot of the medications for bipolar people say they don't make me feel good. So my sister decided she didn't like the way her medications made her feel, and so she self-medicated with alcohol. And essentially she died from alcohol poisoning. We didn't think that she was an alcoholic, but that's how she treated herself, and she drank too much one night. That's the beginning of 2020. COVID hits, and we all have our stories about COVID and how things shut down, how difficult things are. But on top of that, at the time, Rosemary was diagnosed with breast cancer right in the middle of COVID. And so we went through that whole COVID period. She went through 4 different surgeries. The first 2 surgeries, I couldn't even go into the hospital with her. They had, because of COVID restrictions and things like that. But that's another time that I remember that we really felt, both of us were falling back on our faith. Elizabeth King multiple times came to the house and prayed with us and helped us get through those difficult times. Before I came today, Rosemary was like, well, why don't you give me a preview of what you're gonna talk about? And I went, I'm not gonna go do that. But as you look back over your life and you think about the one thing that you're, profoundly grateful to God for, and actually it's meeting my wife, Rosemary, because when I met her, she was one of these people that, I guess I would say that she gets me kind of thing. And I'm not sure sometimes why she puts up with me. But that's when you know somebody really loves you and you love them, is they're willing to put up with all of your faults and all of your quirks and all of those things that that don't necessarily make you a pleasant person to be around sometimes. But I met Rosemary in 2002. What I would say was we were, I guess she was too. We were leading edge. Actually, we met online. So Match.com was in its early stages. She worked at the hospital. She was a dialysis nurse at the time. I was working for Lexmark. Unless I was badly injured in a car wreck or on my deathbed, I would have never met her at the hospital. That's not the place that you necessarily want to meet, is in dialysis. At least that's what she tells me. There's a lot of people that start dialysis in the hospital and never get out. So we met online. Interesting thing is, I had the Match.com account, and she was using her friend's account. Now, some of you may or may not know, Rosemary's 4'10". I think she lied. I think she said she was 5 foot, but anyway, dark hair, blue eyes. Her friend was the profile for this person that I get this inquiry from is 5'9", blonde, and big bone. I'm not even sure why, but she was a big lady. Let me just say, and so Rosemary's thing, she says, well, I'm this and that, and I'm like, wait a second here. This doesn't add up. And she said she had a story, and back in those days, you didn't have iPhones, you didn't, digital photographs were not that big a deal, and it's like, but something kept saying, okay, well, what's the worst thing that can happen, right? You meet and you leave, right? Well, we were set up to meet for breakfast on a Saturday morning. She said, well, where do you want to go? And I said, well, I don't know, I'm from the north side. I said, well, how about Cracker Barrel? And she would say to this day, she almost didn't go out with me, right? She says, I don't know about Cracker Barrel. She says, what about McGee's or scones? And her story would say, I looked at her, I said, scones? Is that like some British thing? And she said, yeah, let's. So we actually met for breakfast, or we're supposed to meet for breakfast the first time at McGee's. And so the story gets shadier. Thanksgiving, I'm actually in Louisville at my sister's house for Thanksgiving, and she says, we're having Thanksgiving at my house. I've got some friends over, but we're going to go down to Cheapside Bar, which is different names now, right? On Thanksgiving night, because it's the only bar in town that's open on Thanksgiving, at least at that time, right? Live music. she says, and there's gonna be some single women there, and just come on down. I said, no, I think we'll just meet for breakfast in the morning. Come back from Louisville, went over to a friend of mine's house, and I'm over there, and I said, well, you know, this person said to meet them at Cheapside tonight. And I said, I'll just meet you in the morning. And my friend kicked me out of the house. He says, you need to go down to Cheapside. I said, okay. So I show up at Cheapside. I walk in, you know, I'm following, so I had on my Indiana Jones hat. That's what I was wearing at the time. And I'm looking around and I see this 5'9" blonde. She's a big lady. Start to walk up to me and I'm like, oh gosh, I've been duped, right? So she walks up and she says, are you looking for Rosemary? And I'm like, yeah. He says, well, she's over there at this table and she's kind of on a date. She says, but there's 7 other single women over there, so come on over. I said, all right. Now, Rosemary would say she wasn't on a date. It happened to be a doctor friend, a doctor colleague from the hospital that was from Syria and wasn't doing Thanksgiving anywhere else, and so he was hanging out with them that day. But I'm still not so sure about that. But anyway, I go over to the table. Rosemary ditches this guy, or she starts hanging out with me, and I guess the rest is sort of history. But the one thing that I would say about her is that she's sort of, everybody talks about things that you're conscious things, right? And a lot of times really what it is you go back on your faith. It's sort of like what's the right thing to do. She's also my conscience, right? Because it's one of those things where you know, you really don't want to do that. And a lot of times I'll it's stuff that's come up here at church and it's like, I don't think I really want to do that. And her statement is always, she'll look at me, she said, you know what my dad would say. You know, and so the first time that happened was actually, we used to have a transportation ministry. Kim knows that, Kelly. We don't drive the bus around, but at that time, Sunday mornings, we would go pick up people at their home that were no longer able to drive, or nursing home, or things like that. We used to have 7 or 8. We had a number of regulars at the time. And Jan Irvintraut came up to me and she hands me this hat. And I'm like, and it says Central Christian on it. I'm saying, what's this for? She says, I think you need to be on the transportation team. I'm like, okay. And I talked to Rosemary about that. I said, well, let me think about this. And she says, you know what my dad would say. So there were a number of situations like that where I'm sitting there, I know what I should do, but it's one of those things where it's not necessarily the easiest thing, or it's a commitment that you don't want to do. And she's always the one that sort of, you know, pushes you. So to wrap up, it's you know, why do you believe in God? And I guess for me, growing up in the environment that I grew up, I never thought of anything but that. And when you run into difficult times and you're really not sure what to go do, that's when you really rely on your faith to get you through, even though it's hard, even though it might not necessarily be the things that you want to go do. For me, and it just the way that I grew up, I never thought that there was anything but that. There's a number of people that will challenge you nowadays and ask you about that. That's what I call it faith. It's one of those things where if it was obvious, right, then they wouldn't call it faith. They would be calling it something else. So how do I do, Paul?
Wonderful.
Am I okay?
You're good.
So that's all I've got. Of questions, things, I mean, I didn't wanna come up here and spend a ton of time going through things. Really?
Well, I've worked at Lexmark too, and grew up on the north side and all that good stuff too, Baptist. But the Philippines, I always thought it was fascinating. Did you enjoy your time at the Philippines?
So the one thing that we learned very quickly when we moved to the Philippines is that going on vacation someplace versus going there to live are two different things. And so the cultural aspect of it was one of these things that, I mean, you just, until you go live in a different culture, it's hard to really go and, understand it. So I mentioned earlier, so my job, I helped, Lexmark move things to Mexico for manufacturing. I was at the time in charge of new product introduction, set up manufacturing down in Mexico, set up manufacturing of new products in South Korea, set up new product manufacturing in Taiwan, set up new factories in China. But a lot of those trips were, Mexico I used to go 2 or 3 times a month kind of thing, right? But that wasn't 30 hours of travel each direction. And anytime we were going to Asia, it was 30 hours of travel time. Longest flight would be 14, 15 hours, the longest segment, 14, 15 hours, then you'd have a layover and catch another 4 or 5 hour flight. It was long travel time. Those trips are more like, the work trips were, it was work, and then when you finished up, you just wanted to get out. You didn't necessarily embed yourself in the culture. And the Philippines they would be offended. It might not be third world, but it's pretty close, and there is third world there, and we saw that.
Follow-up question, did you find, I'm gonna say people of faith in, once you got into the culture much, or?
Yes, so the Philippines is, it may be different now, over 80% Catholic.
Yeah.
Right, that's the Spanish influence there, and so,
Did you see it in them?
I would see it. But one of those cultural things was, sometimes you would see people justify the way that they do it, and it wasn't necessarily what I would call being faithful to, it's like all of us, I'm gonna go do this because this benefits me kind of thing, and so I've heard people talk about corruption and things like that, but corruption is rampant there, is the net of it, to do the deal, somebody's wanting to get paid off kind of thing. I know Jim Ross sitting here today, but it surprised me when he talked about when he used to have to do contracts with the government, government officials to build a school or something here. And he talked about some of those folks being corrupt, and I'm like, really, man, but it goes on here, over there, it takes it to a totally different level, I guess is what I would say. And so, but until you, it's hard to explain, but until you lived in a different culture, even though Rosemary had a pretty cushy lifestyle while we were there, one of the things that she actually did on the side was that there was a Albert Schweitzer orphanage there that she was very involved with, and I was involved with the American Chamber of Commerce in Cebu there, and so we sort of partnered up with that orphanage, and we did a number of things to improve the facility where they lived, which this is the kind of things, the place that they lived is the kind of things you would see in movies, and it was not necessarily the best. It was a better environment than they would have had otherwise, but it's not necessarily the best environment. But we did a number of things to improve their living conditions and their life. One of the things that Rosemary insisted that I do every year is I would go there dressed up as Santa Claus every year and pass out gifts to the orphans and things like that. It wasn't, in 85-degree weather in a Santa Claus outfit, with no air conditioning, right? There's no air conditioning in this building. That's one of those things where it's like, I didn't really want to do it, but it was the right thing to do.
When you were talking about relying on your faith during the time when you, mother and father's having difficulties, your divorce and all that, what does that mean? How do you unpack that? Does that mean you were praying more and church more? What did you just read the Bible, or what were you doing?
I think what I would say is, was I in church more? No, I don't think I was in church more, but I was praying a lot more and searching for more answers in Scripture. I heard Brian Woodard say the other day he's a reformed evangelical kind of thing. So that's one of the things that it would be interesting to go back and look at that Scripture again through a different filter to go see exactly. But I still found some comfort by doing that. Josh, you got any other questions about the Philippines or anything? No?
Been there, never lived there, but
Yeah.
you ought to try a 30-hour military flight over.
Long and extremely uncomfortable, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the worst I had to do was fly an economy for that, but I'm sure it's still way better than a military transport flight.
Yeah.
Jeff, what's next for you?
What's next for me?
What's next for you?
I don't think I'm doing it. When you live in a 100-year-old home, you don't run out of things to do. I will say that. So, yesterday I told Rosemary, I said, if she would ask me to do something, I said, put it on the list. It's like, and you need to prioritize the list. The list is long.
I know we've enjoyed having you on mission trips. I hadn't seen you on those for a while, and then you started coming, so that's been great to have you on there.
That's the one thing that you get in retirement.
Yeah.
Is more time for that, right? Unfortunately, we're not in the same shape that we were
Right,
20 years ago.
Yeah,
We don't climb up.
when you're our age and we're the youngest folks out there, you're going, something's wrong with this picture.
When you're up in the trusses on the top, and I'm sitting there looking at that, and I'm like, no, I don't think I'm going to go up there.
Yeah.
And if I did, I wouldn't want Rosemary to see me.
Yeah. Last time he goes, yeah, you take that all back. All right, thank you so much.